Ahoy hoy gang, if this is your first time with us, welcome, and if you're joining us from a previous video, hey, we love to see it, and I hope you're doing well. It's Season 5! I think this season is definitely one of the shakiest yet. There's still some absolutely great episodes, but yeah, it's got some cracks. So, what works, what fails, and what accomplishments can be hailed? It's time to shake the hive as we cover Season 5. It's Heimlich County Fair time! Oh man, this is a whole episode, gang! So they go to the fair after Peggy tries to make the perfect voting booth. At the county fair, they meet fringe candidates for president, and we find out that Hank is very much in favor of then governor turned president, George W. Bush. And yeah, the episode is in 2000s. Spoilers, George W. would in fact win that presidency. Bobby becomes enthralled in the diving antics of Mitch the pig, but after poor Mitch gets his foot stuck on a tube underwater, Bobby jumps in to save the day. Bobby, after saving the pig, becomes something of a hero, and a Bush-Cheney spokesperson comes up and asks the Hills to join them at a rally event. Meanwhile, Luann joins the Communist Party and laughs about canceling out Hank's vote, which, she's got some pretty sound logic there. I'm not saying she knows a thing about her candidate, but she's a pro of getting under Hank's skin, even calling him a communist in his own home. Peggy convinces Hank to take Luann to the Bush meeting so that she can see what a real candidate is about. I'll say, as someone that was a kid in Bush America, the King of the Hill impression of Bush is probably the most reserved of all time. They paint him as a politician, and the delivery isn't that twangy Texan a lot of impressionists would latch onto, much like how Trump impressionists only focus on dropping their jaw or lingering on words. The world of impressions is tricky, but the fact that King of the Hill does it with any amount of reverence, even again in The Father, the Son, and JC, is commendable. Bush walks through the crowd after his speech, and Hank begins to spiral after shaking Bush's hand. The man doesn't have a firm handshake. The gang mocks him for having any doubt. He starts to obsess over the handshake and just watches it on a loop until he gives up and just goes with Dale to Christmas shop. When Peggy opens her polls, only Bill is there. And when Luann finds out that Hank isn't going to vote, she tries to hunt him down. Dale takes Hank to Mexico so they can wait out the election with assumed identities, which, sweet of Dale to save Hank from any kind of civil unrest. But sure enough, Luann convinces him to come home so that they can vote together, and he even gets a police escort. The end of the episode even just ends with Hank and Bobby reminding everyone to register to vote. Not to vote Republican or Democrat, just to vote. Any other series, I think there'd be a slant one way or another, but King of the Hill stands firmly in the middle ground. Hank's fear of George Bush's limped wrist is never resolved by the end of the episode because it doesn't matter. The episode is about the 2000 election, sure, but with some very minor changes. You could replace Bush with any presidential candidate and the episode would play out the exact same. It's not a celebration of a candidate like an episode of Broad City. It's a celebration of the ability to vote in a free democracy. A message that rings true 20 years later. Remember to vote. Remember to let your voice be heard. Apathy is the greatest form of surrender. There's an untainted idea of patriotism in King of the Hill. The characters love America while trying to celebrate the best that it has to offer and criticizing the parts that fail society. You can love your country while critiquing it, and the fact that while Hank may be a Republican, the stories are so down to earth that anyone can relate makes the messages of the show that much more digestible than other media. No other show could have an election episode as effective as King of the Hill. The Perils of Polling is a strong candidate for an 8 out of 10. Bobby's on summer break and wasting his days away sleeping in after Taxi reruns on Nick at Night. Don't worry, I feel old too. Hank decides to get Bobby a job. Meanwhile, Peggy runs into Min and they compete at giving blood. Buck helps Hank get Bobby a job as a golf caddy. Buck naturally takes a shining to Bobby, which is very unfortunate for Bobby. He starts taking it easy and gets involved in racing an ice block down a hill and taking out a golfer. Bobby is then sent to Buck's to apologize, and he's celebrated as Buck makes him his personal caddy and the two truly start to bond. We also find out Buck has a son. Doesn't quite remember his name, though. Bobby starts using Buck's mannerisms until Buck cheats in front of Bobby and teaches him to be smart about how he cheats. Hank drops him off for Buck to babysit till he's tired of Bobby, and Buck never does, and he ends up taking him to Hot Springs, Arkansas to gamble, where Bobby starts to see the darker, more adult side of Buck. Hank comes to Bobby's rescue as he renounces Buck's old ways. Bobby already found out the hard way that Buck is a wild card of a person. He's always going to be weird and off-kilter. You can't trust someone like Buck, but he makes a round of golf infinitely more interesting. Buck Strickland is a great character, but overall a pretty selfish person who rarely does anything for the good of anyone but himself. Yet this episode paints him as genuinely caring for Bobby through all of it and doting on him in a way that humanizes him. Sure, he manipulated Bobby at the end, but in the start, that was just him having a good time. His friendship with Bobby didn't start because he needed anything from him. Even having Hank slow down so Buck can get hit once by the gamblers he stiffed shows that while Hank may idolize the man, he's not dumb of what's really going on. And all of this while I'm not even talking about Peggy's B story. The season can be best described as sectional. Where the early seasons didn't do it as much, Season 5 is a resurgence of scene gags. Gags will play out, and that's the whole scene, and usually has nothing to do with the overall story. They're usually merged into a kind of B story. The perils of polling lingered on so many scenes to get as many gags as possible, something that would be more common in, say, Family Guy or The Simpsons. You know, the shot at any convention where they're walking past absurd panels so you laugh. It's not that King of the Hill ditches the dialogue comedy that made it so strong, it's more like it's wading into deeper waters. It's pushing the envelope on what they can do, and it still feel like King of the Hill in the end. And what they do with Peggy makes this episode one of the best showings of her character in the whole show. Min and Peggy are competing to donate pints of blood to get a mug. Peggy, just out of spite, is willing to drive to Houston and give blood until she's crawling with her victory mug in hand. Kathy Najimy is an absolute powerhouse as Peggy in this episode, and makes it just a truly delightful side story that captures the real essence of Peggy. But I mean, even Stephen Root giving 120% makes Buck a whole persona and feel. He brings what can be just a scummy boss into the light as a fully fleshed out super champion of business. The Buck Stops Here is a 10 out of 10 episode on a hot streak. Bobby is going to see Tilly and Gary for Bobby's 13th birthday. Interestingly enough, Tilly is actually voiced by Kay Callan this episode instead of Beth Grant, who is actually shown in the last episode as one of the nurses. Neat! Gary would be played again by Carl Reiner. Bobby is tired of being treated like a little kid. Gary decides to take Bobby around and teach him all the things it takes for him to be a man. Meanwhile, Hank is building coffins in the garage. However, he skirts some work on Peggy's coffin, and she is not pleased. Gary gives Bobby some pins and he starts to feel like a man as they head home and get ready to meet up with the Gribbles. And where Bobby feels spiritually like a man, Joseph is going through one doozy of a puberty. And a grown man needs a grown man actor. Brittany Murphy, you were great and all, but it's time for America's #1 hype beast to take over. That's right, folks. Joseph is now voiced by TV's Breckenmeyer. You want to supercharge your show? Throw some of the Breckster in there. Robot Chicken, Franklin and Bash, Rat Race, that movie from the 2000s with Mr. Bean. Anything is better with the Breckster on deck. I hate this Joseph so much. He's the worst. But I dislike him because Breckmeister, his friends let him call him that, does such a good job voicing him as he becomes a regular cast member. Yeah, he's going through puberty, and you do feel bad for the kid, but as Bobby is trying to get him a date, he just keeps screwing up until he eventually ends up kissing Connie, shocking Bobby. She tries to apologize, he refuses, and before long, they're joyriding the Winnebago and crashing it into a light pole. It's another Puberty is Awkward episode that is really well written, and you get why Joseph is the way he is, but man, it's just more of the same. That being said, again, where the Peggy Blood B story was terrific, Hank building coffins is just incredible. He goes all out on building Peggy the best coffin possible, making it better than his, and then they just get drunk and eat pizza in their matching coffins. He wasn't making them because he fears the future or anything, he just genuinely wanted to make a coffin. He was just fascinated by the woodwork. Like, all things considered, this might be one of my favorite Hank episodes, and he's barely in it. It's just whenever he is, he's his best self. He loves Peggy, romances her, treats her like his best friend, all while just making coffins. It's a weirdly wholesome thing to see. And again, just peak Peggy even with the 13th cake reveal. Kathy Najimy is a generational treasure. Never forget it. I Don't Want to Wait is an awkwardly hairy 7 out of 10. It's our next Thanksgiving episode. How does it stack up compared to the other ones? Probably the worst. John Redcorn is over to see Dale about their lawsuit first mentioned back Nancy's boys. He sees Joseph has grown up and wants to spend more time with him and try and impart his teachings. Which, to Nancy's credit, she does say that Dale is Joseph's father. Like, you get John Redcorn's frustration, but also his actions, his consequences. However, when Joseph doesn't pay attention to his speech at class, Bobby is actually laser focused. Luann tells Peggy everyone hates her Bockel tournament, so she decides to find a new game, and when she can't, she develops a new one. Spin the choice. John Redcorn gives Bobby literature, and he gets just a few twinges of white guilt, so much so he protests the entire spectacle of Thanksgiving, while John just wants to use him as a bridge to Joseph. We see Bobby's love of cooking pop up, and kudos to Bobby for finding a subject and wanting to learn more about it. He's an inquisitive kid, and we've seen it time and time again. It fits his character. Granted, John Redcorn shouldn't have dumped all that on the poor kid just to get closer to Joseph. We also get the first appearance of the Boomhauer family. Boomhauer's brother Patch would not be in attendance. John Redcorn crashes the Thanksgiving, and Dale even gives him his settlement from the government for 12 acres. Hank lets Bobby talk about the Native American traditions, and he brings up the local Asanazi tribe that were cannibals, and John runs off. Dale tries to console him, and he tries to tell Dale that he's Joseph's dad until he loses it over his people being accused of cannibalism. Hank even admits to Bobby he agrees the land should have never been taken away, and they reconcile. The family picks up dinner at John Redcorn's new land, and everyone sits down together. Again, the B story of Spin the Choice and Peggy is absolutely phenomenal. Honestly, these little bursts of Peggy feel like a return to the side story we got all the way back in Season 1, with the Order of the Straight Arrow. It feels like they remembered how to write Peggy in a way that isn't just her being a monster all the time. Give her these quirky bursts, it's what she specializes in. That being said, the Peggy parts bring out just an otherwise fine episode. The John Redcorn bits are stretched out, but huge props to Jonathan Joss for going all in with the character. His delivery is fantastic like always, and he's legitimately trying. Spin the Choice is a free choice of a 7 out of 10. Peggy really does shine in the B story, where she doesn't have to carry the whole episode. Anyway, Peggy has to substitute at the high school and ends up teaching the star quarterback David Kaliki Ali, the flying Hawaiian, and what could possibly go wrong? She runs into Miriam Caney, played by Natalie Canarday, and the star Spanish teacher of the school who she tries to get on the good side of. Hank is at his booster club meeting, and there we meet the booster president, Preston Rogers, played by none other than Terry Bradshaw. Terrell Cartwright is played by Howie Long, and Digby Wilkins by James Brown. Oh, but the star power doesn't stop there. No. Not only do we get the return of Amy Hill as Mrs. Kaliki Ali, but David is actually played by award-winning nice guy, Brendan Fraser. David doesn't do anything in class and stumbles in late because he has protection from the teachers, cutting him some slack because he's an absolute legend on the turf. Peggy is determined to teach him after being called unteachable. She stays up late trying to come up with a playbook to help him learn, and he just blows her off. So Peggy fails David so he can't play for 3 weeks because he scored low on the test. The booster club confronts Hank to get David back onto the team. They even have him work at Strickland Propane as a work study to circumvent Peggy's failing grade. When he mocks even Hank's final, he has to force an A just to let David pass. I gotta say, Peggy is not in the wrong for doing her job. If she was extra harsh on him or harassed him in any way, it would be one thing, but she tried to make the information digestible and relatable to him and offered to take time out of her day after his practice to teach him so he wouldn't fail. She gave him all the tools to succeed and he took none of them. They then cheated the system around her to get him to play. Usually I can say with confidence Peggy is wrong and just a problem throughout, but it feels like Season 2 Peggy got slingshot into the future and she's a perfectly reasonable person doing a perfectly reasonable thing. It's just disappointing. That being said, huge shoutouts to all the guest voices. I mean, Terry Bradshaw is downright inspiring with how into it he gets. Howie Long plays Terrell in such a unique angle as this jittering, awkward guy, and James Brown steals any scene where he's got lines. I mean, the three work together for years, they know how to play off of one another, but even then, it's great seeing it like this. I actually remember the Football Sunday where they talked about this episode before it aired. It was a wild time to watch TV, I tell you what. It's kind of messed up the Booster Club got David's mother to defend him as well, but I mean, that just gives Amy Hill time to kill it yet again. You'd think she'd want her son to learn, but hey, everybody does things differently. But David finds out they were setting him up to succeed no matter what, and he goes to Peggy to teach him geometry, and instead she helps him learn about propane with Hank. It really shows who Peggy is as a person that she's so dedicated to helping David because she just loves teaching. She didn't do it for an award or anything by the end. Genuinely, this is a great episode of King of the Hill and one of the best Peggy episodes. She's not overly zealous, fits her character with where she was in the series, and it just feels like such a return to form. Peggy makes the big leagues as a Hail Mary 10 out of 10. Peggy is doing a float of the flags of Iwo Jima. Yes, she means Iwo Jima. Peggy wants to use Cotton's medals for the float until they bump into Cotton's clan at Megalomart, and they find out they've been living at the VFW. Peggy thinks Cotton is being horrible to Dee Dee and GH, but when Hank finds Cotton turning in cans for money, he finds out that he lost his house and is basically struggling to keep his head above water while refusing any help. Hank does his best to help his dad get a job and eventually gets him one at Burton's as a greeter, but he ends up growling away that job for men's room attendant. Dave Thomas returns as Lane Prattley, and he's just so god-dang iconic. Cotton's car gets collected. He tries to get Veterans Day off, but his boss refuses. Hank goes to collect him instead of leaving him to just wallow. When Cotton sees Prattley driving in his Cadillac, he decides to take back what's rightfully his and disrupts the entire parade. He then goes on a warpath while Hank stays in steady pursuit. Cotton goes home to Bobby to make his final amends before getting his medals and trying to go out on his terms until Dee Dee drops GH on him and he starts bonding and taking care of him. Cotton then decides to claim the money he spent on Hank growing up as his and demands Hank pay him back. If this was Cotton's last episode, I think he'd leave on the highest note possible. Not only does the episode focus on his time as a veteran, it makes him a sympathetic character in a lot of ways that we just didn't get earlier on. Now he does absolutely still have the same flaws he always has, but Toby Huss just gives him so much more depth than you'd think was necessary, and gives us just a knockout performance that makes the episode one of the best of the season. The episode covers a lot of ground but feels like a cohesive story. Sure, Cotton deserves to be stuck in squalor to some degree, but Dee Dee and GH don't, and sure, Cotton has been horrible to Hank, but he genuinely wants a better life for GH and loves him wholeheartedly. Cotton's not perfect, but he still has his own code. When Cotton comes marching home is a hard-fought and well-earned 9 out of 10. Connie is the yearbook editor, and Bobby wants her to slap his mug on some pages. She denies him, and he feels like he doesn't have any chance of being in more than just his class photo until he sees auditions for the Landry Longhorn. Jason Ritter actually returns as Mr. Grandy, and man, nuanced performances are something special. Man crushes it like always. Hank actually builds Bobby a prop for his audition, and sure enough, he steals the crowd's hearts and steers them in the right direction. Get it? Because he's a Longhorn? He's the new Landry Longhorn, and it honestly feels like the natural progression of his comedy. Just last season, he was sharpening his comedy as a rodeo clown. Now he's the Longhorn mascot. Our little Bobby is growing up. The gang then proceed to spook Bobby about being the Longhorn by telling him about the McManerberry pounding where the other team will beat him up. And when it starts to happen, he just bolts instead of taking his lumps. Which, yeah, why wouldn't he? He didn't want to be beaten down in public. And in his all is lost moment, he's hit with inspiration. The ultimate armadillo-shaped scheme that only one Dale Gribble can help with. He goes to steal the Dillo, but in the process gets locked in the storage room that they're trying to break into to steal the horns. The mascot is stolen with no sight of Bobby. Daffy Dubs is an absolute icon. The way he yells and cheers people on, it's insane in the best way. I love him. And after Dale bashes Bobby for being a coward and Hank considers it the all is lost moment, Bobby hops out of the costume trash can, snatches the Dillo, and runs out onto the field like an absolute champion and takes his aforementioned lumps. I mean, what can be said about a perfect episode? This is just Bobby shining like an absolute star. We've seen his comedy evolve, and now he's actually getting credit for applying his love towards what he's doing, much like in Meet the Propaniacs. I know I keep bringing attention to it, but it's important to see that even if the episodes and story as a whole aren't really keeping a set narrative as much as they used to, Bobby has stayed consistent. He's still himself, he's still growing, and we see him, Connie, and Joseph growing in real time as the series moves on. The episode is smart, has a ton of great emotion, and is a fantastic closed adventure for Bobby and a celebration of his hard work throughout the series. What makes Bobby run is a very peppy 10 out of 10. Another year, another Christmas. Man, I sure hope it's not a Bill Christmas episode like Pretty Pretty Dresses. That'd not be great. I'd take another Helenium, I guess. Well, Bill gets addicted to gifting kids gifts after taking letters from Santa since it gives him purpose. When Bill finds out that the kids won't even see Santa from the presents he delivers, he decides that's not enough. That's not enough for these poor kids who deserve something better. He wants to give them something special. And so Bill decides to build a Santa's village so kids can come and play and get toys and feel seen and appreciated, giving him a way to work through his holiday trauma while helping his community. That's just really touching and shows Bill just wants to help and make people smile. That's kind of sweet. We get our first mention of Octavio. Everything is a hit. Bill even gets a date with a mom played by Katherine Harold. Things are looking up. I also haven't talked about it much this season, but there's a lot more sharp comedy bits. Quick snaps between characters, dumb gang gags. It can just be Dale saying something and Bill gets upset, and that's literally the whole scene. These little vignettes that do absolutely nothing for the overarching story, but flesh out the characters. They make the season more fun and honestly add some momentum. The season has felt a lot more swift than previous seasons, and I know that doesn't quite make sense. Past seasons loved to linger on scenes and get the comedy from the characters, and it did produce a lot of heartfelt moments, but here we're seeing the show stretch its legs more and see what they want to get away with. Well, after Christmas, Bill decides to get a bounce house and try and make Santa's village a year-long tradition. He genuinely wants to help kids and make sure they aren't beaten down by the world. But Bill hasn't cleaned his suit in months, and by MLK Day, it's worn down and stained, and his house is falling apart. Yeah, he starts to fall apart until he runs into Wally at the dryer, who needs Santa's help something fierce. Wally is a grown adult played by Ryan Philippe and decides to take advantage of Bill's kindness. And yeah, he takes over the bounce house and betrays his kindness, gives Bobby and the kids a 40. He's just the worst. Granted, Bill shouldn't have been Santa in February. There was fault on both sides, but that's the episode. Some horrible monster abusing a very obviously suffering man. Wally gets arrested and Bill feels like he can't let his son down and begs Hank for help even after he tried to rob him blind. So Bill lets Wally enlist in the military instead. Bill deserves a win. Not a huge win, but something. It's just been bashing down Bill time and time again, and it makes you hurt for the poor guy. Granted, he's had his fair shares of just being weird, but I don't know. The episode starts strong, but spirals so fast. Where Pretty Pretty Dresses served a bigger purpose, this is just kicking a man when he's down. 'Twas the Nut Before Christmas is a festive, but uneventful 5 out of 10. The episode opens with a butterfly flying through the sky, and that sets the tone for this very special episode. Peggy chooses a romantic Rose Farm set movie for everyone to go see in theaters. However, Hank's truck gives him trouble and refuses to start. Hank finally gets the old girl to turn over, and they see the flowers of time. When they're watching the movie, for once, Hank starts to cry and terrifies Dale. Peggy thinks it's because he related to the film and is thinking about Bobby, but it's him worried about his truck. He has to live with the embarrassment of crying at the theater and pretending it was just some eye-watering. The prognosis is grim, though. He found water in the old girl's exhaust. He finally takes her to a mechanic, and he tells him he only has 500 to 600 more miles as he tries to fight through the end with the poor thing. This was the going merry sinking of the 90s. This was everyone ugly crying as an iconic character disappeared once and for all. Hank remembers all the times in his life the truck helped while he tries to bring life to it somehow. Again, we get these quick jokes that help build the characters. Hanky snaps at Peggy and Bobby is genuinely worried about his dad, but Hank just keeps lashing out at anyone and everyone that gets in his way. And yet, still, Bobby finds a chance for the truck with Pickup Heaven. There he runs into Marty Mendez, played by Marcelo Toubert, who actually played Carlos Shenton in Starfield. Topical! Hank's truck dies on train tracks, and as he's trying to fix it, a train starts to barrel through. He can't stop the train in time, and it destroys his precious truck. Hank then turns and blames Bobby for losing said truck. Bobby decides to walk home instead of letting his dad down one more time. It starts to rain, and Hank decides to test drive a new truck and find his son. As he's driving, he starts to fall in love with the new car and all its futuristic features, like a built-in compass. This was the 2000s. That was a selling point for some people. And sure enough, Hank finds Bobby, they make up, and Hank gets his brand new truck. Chasing Bobby makes you feel for Hank. It really, truly does. And seeing him break down as the truck that he loved breaks down is something a lot of people can relate to. Again, it's a small thing, but the episode is a perfectly constructed 22 minutes. It's a fantastic pocket adventure at Hill House that shows how great pickups can be, I guess. As I look back, this might actually be one of my favorite episodes of the season. If only for the emotional core of Hank losing his beloved truck and Bobby just trying to help his poor dad. Chasing Bobby is a heartstring pulling 10 out of 10. Dale gets a new Texas license plate for Texas natives. Bill can't get one since he's from Louisiana, and Hank can't find his birth certificate, so he calls his mom, who's played again by Kay Callan. Cotton has been filming everything GH has done and has no idea where Hank's birth certificate is. He and Peggy start to speculate that maybe he's adopted. Wouldn't that be nice? However, when he finds his info online, he discovers he was never born in Texas, but rather NYC. Cotton tells him he took Tilly to New York for a little baby moon, and ol' Hank is a Yank now. He's absolutely destroyed by this revelation, despite Bobby's excitement, and old Cotton is scheming something with his old war buddies. Erwin Linkler, played by Jack Carter, and Stinky, played by Ed Asner. We find out that Cotton had taken Tilly to NYC to take out a supposed Fidel Castro at a Yankees game, and that's actually when Tilly had Hank, in a Yankee stadium. Cotton decides to use Hank for his truck so he can complete his plan. Man, this really takes away all the goodwill Cotton built up not 4 episodes ago. Like he pretends to love Hank just to frame him and use him as their fall guy. They hoist him up and toss him into the Alamo Museum, where he discovers that soldiers from all across the country fought at the Alamo, including New York. Cotton did all this to get to Fidel Castro and take him out once and for all. In case you're wondering, Fidel Castro died in 2016. Like, there's no redemption for Cotton in this episode. There's no moment where he tries to make things right. All he says is for Topsy to jump in and save him after firing into the water, and even then, Hank had survived on his own. Literally, the only resolution we get is that Hank is a Texan in spirit, and that's good enough for him. Woo! It's not a bad episode, mind you, but it is just a horrible, horrible look for Cotton. He's really got a swinging pendulum this season, and it's kinda wild. Yankee Hanky is a well-defended 8 out of 10. Someone's got a birthday, I wonder who? That's right, it's Bill's birthday, and the gang is going on a road trip to Austin, the party capital of Texas. They even wait for Hank to leave exactly at 5 to go with them. The B story has Peggy and Bobby going to Luann's pool party and loving hamburgers. The only problem? They were cooked with charcoal, not clean, burning propane. And so, while Bill, Boomhauer, and Dale are partying it up in party capital USA, Austin, Hank is being a perfectly reasonable guest, refusing to have any fun with the gang, like mooning everyone in the Great Glass Elevator. Hank finally gives in and decides to drop trow and moon the entire hotel, including former Texas Governor Ann Richards, played by Ann Richards, while all the other guys keep their pants tightly secured. When Ann Richards' security detail come to the room, Bill takes the fall for Hank and ends up having a blast with Ann Richards, and they even spark up something of a romance. Ann Richards actually put some effort into her performance, much more than James Carville did back in season 2. While you can definitely hear the politician in her voice, her cadence is really solid and her delivery is a lot better than you expect of someone with no voiceover experience. She just seemed to genuinely enjoy the series. And so they start up a romance and start falling for one another until Lenore shows up to throw a wrench into everything. Lenore is actually played by Ellen Barkin. Lenore gets in the way, Bill buckles and wants to get back with Lenore, then Anne helps him find his spine, and finally moon Lenore and move on with his life. I know I'm speeding through the episode, but make no mistake, it's easily one of the strongest written and best performed episodes of the season. The absolute knockout story of Bobby and Peggy cooking their own charcoal burgers and talking about how good they are as they get addicted is just fantastic. They're just so ravenous for flavor, and it's glorious. It seriously may be one of the best B stories of the entire series, running parallel to the Great Bill Healing episode. All the elements he struggled with are tackled with one fell swoop by the former governor, who supports and empowers him to retake his own life. She gives him the tough love and understanding ear he needed for all these years, and he finally seems to have some genuine happiness. Hank in the Great Glass Elevator is a 10 out of 10 episode that eclipses the competition. Hank and the gang are watching golf while Bobby practices his singing. When he's on the retirement home stage, he runs into Jerry Popper, who decides to give him a gift. Chip Block, the all-American running back puppet. Mr. Popper is played by Tom Poston of Newhart show fame, a storied old comedy legend who was a part of everything from Mork and Mindy to Princess Diaries 2. All classic comedy classics. And so Bobby goes down the dark, dangerous, and mostly cursed road of being a ventriloquist. Dale has a completely natural and common reaction of abject terror at the wooden abomination because, and this is true, that puppet shouldn't exist. He is an affront to all that is right and touched by the sun's life-giving light. Hank, probably due to all of his years of emotional abuse, finds a connection with that dummy devil. Bobby starts learning sports to better bring Chip to life, and it's sort of bittersweet to see Hank bonding with Chip and not registering that it's Bobby saying all these facts. Dale, in a horrific flashback, shows how his parents nightmarishly gifted him one of those wooden wraiths as a birthday gift. We get our first appearance and voicing of Octavio. He'd be voiced by the absolute acting powerhouse and machete-themed action hero, Danny Trejo, who would also go on to play Enrique. I mean, nowadays everyone knows Danny Trejo, and he's a beloved actor and fantastic restaurateur. But this was back before even Spy Kids had released. Fun fact, Mike Judge actually stars in Spy Kids too. So that's your weird relation of the day. But the preferential treatment just gets worse and worse as Hank just blissfully blows off that he's laughing at possessed wood chips. He neglects Bobby for a puppet that Bobby is puppeting. It's just downright satanic. However, Dale does his patriotic duty and throws Chip in a wood chipper to destroy him once and for all. He saved Rainy Street from a monster, and Hank just can't see that. And yet, like some kind of ghoulish Geppetto, Hank decides to try and cobble a new hell beast together. Peggy, the flawed saint she is, tries to tell her husband he's committing crimes against humanity, and arguably, just as importantly, a crime against his son. And so Hank tries to rectify his darkest moments, and he makes a puppet of Bobby for Bobby's new act. It's a cursed episode. It's just the Propaniacs without the charm and more of those fiendish, foolish fiends. 1 out of 10. I hate puppets. The Dale parts are pretty funny and are expertly executed. If you're some kind of puppet apologist, it'd probably be like a 9 out of 10. But the superior puppet hater squad can skip this episode outright. Buck hired a new employee over at Strickland Propane, Tammy. Tammy is played by a tiny talent of the 2000s, Academy, Golden Globe, and British Academy Award-winning actress Renee Zellweger. That's right, Vanessa Bloom from B-Movie, one of the most important pieces of cinema in the modern age. Peggy takes Tammy out and they start to bond. She even invites Tammy to dinner at their house. Peggy vows to help Tammy get her GED and even has her move into the house while going out with all kinds of gentlemen at all times of the day. Sure enough, Tammy is a lady of the night. But she even earns Hank's respect by standing up to Buck as he harasses her. He offers to take her out and meet the guys on his route to find a guy to settle down with. Still just blissfully unaware. The friendship between Peggy and Tammy is just so genuine, it's great that she has someone to bond with and actually take an interest in her. Tammy pays Hank early for the rent while she's staying with them, buys Hank a hat, and gives Peggy a makeover that blows Hank away. Tammy is a net positive for Hill House and is just an absolutely delightful character, brilliantly brought to life by an award-winning superstar. She also gives us the one hat that truly makes Hank shine like a supernova. And so Hank cruises in a caddy and even defends Tammy with the fury of 10,000 suns. Yeah, he becomes her pimp inadvertently. And that does not fly with the flyest guy of the OKC, Alabaster Jones, played by the smoothest, meanest, chronic king himself, Snoop Dogg. Alabaster Jones is a magical force. Tammy just has this infallible heart of gold, and this episode is one of the strongest of the entire series because everyone in it is giving 120%. We get the Mac Daddy of Heimlich County, and Tammy gets to walk out of this a free woman. Oh yeah, is just good television. Again, if there's a special guest star, 9 times out of 10, they are going to bring the absolute pepper. Renee Zellweger makes herself unforgettable as Tammy, and Snoop Dogg voices a legend. The episode is such a simple premise, and yet delivers with so many well-done jokes and solid emotional points that it is an easy and unquestioned 10 out of 10. Dale gets poisoned on his own supply at work and has to give up exterminating. His doctor is Stephen Tobolowsky, who you'd recognize from Groundhog Day, but would also be featured heavily in Silicon Valley, another Mike Judge series. Since Dale can't work as an exterminator, he has to get an office job with Hank's help, and he ends up at a paper company working on special post-its. He's stripped of his individuality and, worse, his hat. His boss, Amy Pittman, is played by comedic tour de force Lisa Kudrow, aka the Owl in BoJack Horseman, and nothing else. Dale goes from bonding with Joseph over raising cockroaches to firing people because no one else wants to. He starts climbing the work ladder more and more by selling away more of his soul by callously firing coworkers left and right. However, when the roaches he was raising with Joseph get out and invade the office, he's the only one with the guts to fight back against the six-legged horrors, and in the process reclaims his identity as Dale, the Exterminator. Not only does Lisa Kudrow play Amy with a perfect subtlety that makes her feel like middle management in the best way, which is something very hard to do without living that life yourself, she also again just brings an iconic voice to a timeless series. The other wild thing here is, this is a Dale episode. Hank is part of very little of it altogether, but for the most part, the main focus is entirely on Dale in this completely new and foreign environment to him, and it's probably the most humanizing episode he gets in the entire series, including Dreamweaver. The jokes are sharp, and the episode is carried by Johnny Hardwick, bringing his career best to Dale in one of the wildest episodes yet. Nothing happens in the bulk of this episode until it just brilliantly shines, and he walks off exiting the corporate cage with pride. The Exterminator is a highly toxic 10 out of 10, and a must-watch for any marathon, as it just makes Dale that much more of the icon he has lived to be through the years. Luann gets broken up with at the Photoshop where they develop your photos from your film for you. Simpler but weirder time. Luann reveals she's not a virgin, and so Hank takes her to church where Reverend Stroob offers to make her a born-again virgin. Hank and Peggy agree to be her celibacy sponsors. I gotta say, while Mary Tyler Moore did do a good job with Reverend Stroob, Ashley Gardner really brought her to life. I mean, she harnesses that Dairy Queen thick Fargo, Minnesota accent just right. They go to church group and learn more about the program. We also meet Rhett Vandergraff, played by the lightning bolt on the track, Owen Wilson. However, as they go around in their circles, we find out that Peggy was not a virgin before she met with Hank. Her friend Wayne thought he was gay and wanted to see if he was, so they tested, and sure enough, he was. Luann gets dunked and baptized where she's accosted by a frisbee man, played by then unknown Nathan Fillion, Professor Mobius himself. Peggy actually goes to Nancy for help, and she listens with a concerned ear, which is great and shows off how they have a multi-tiered relationship no matter what happens. Hank tries to set Luann up with a guy with strong values, so he hooks her up with Rhett, and it really shows that Hank just can't pick a good guy to go out with Luann. He's got no idea. They go out dancing, and sure enough, Rhett asks Luann to marry him. Luann reveals that Peggy wasn't a virgin when she met Hank, and he's horrified. He goes to help Rhett and Luann get married, and Peggy tries to stop them. Hank catches Rhett and Luann in their van and decides to speed up their wedding. Peggy is trying everything to make it right in Hank's eyes, and he still refuses to accept any form of apology until Luann calls off the wedding and Peggy gets born again. Hank carries Peggy from the lake, and they finally make up. I think they shouldn't have milked the Hank being mad for as long as they did, and maybe gave more screen time to Rhett to just let Owen Wilson be weird with him for a few more lines. Just one more scene or something. I feel like I was denied proper cringe. That being said, it is a great episode, and I mean, Kathy Najimy would even win an Annie for her voice work for Peggy this episode, and it's very easy to see why. She delivers an absolute powerhouse performance, and it's just an episode where the greatest complaints are nitpicks. Luann Virgin 2.0 is a born again 9 out of 10. Bobby is sick as a dog. Ha! I am so witty, you guys. Peggy takes Bobby to the doctor and they did an allergy test and he's allergic to dander. Dog dander. Hank gets Bobby allergy pills while he builds a special radiant heat heated floored doghouse for Ladybird. Ladybird has absolutely no interest in the house whatsoever. Bill really went all out for the christening of this doghouse, and it is just great. Again, short bursts of comedy that bring the whole thing together. But then, Hank just keeps pushing Bobby to double his dosage of allergy meds to just get through it, and then introduces the 5-brain idea of having Bobby, his son, live in the doghouse instead of the dog. Bobby actually agrees completely and starts living there, inviting his friends over. Peggy hates that everyone knows that Bobby lives in a doghouse, and Peggy misses him. Bobby gets his allergies under control and decides to stay in the doghouse, and he has his own little slice of heaven. Dale and Nancy celebrate their anniversary at the gun range. Dale and everyone mocks Peggy and Hank for Bobby living in the doghouse, and ultimately Hank has to give Ladybird over to Bill. But when Bobby is back in the house and he has to follow house rules, he looks for any excuse to go back to the doghouse and refuses to go back home. And then Bobby outbarks a dog and uses a scratch pad in front of Connie. It's a whole thing. Hank and Peggy then tear everything away to keep the house sterile for Bobby, who just wants to stay in his doghouse. Hank has lost his dog and everything he loves. Bobby sees the despair in his eyes and decides to get Ladybird back and stop the act. Did Bobby take it too far? Yes. Should Hank have even recommended Bobby stay in a doghouse? Absolutely not. It's a tricky episode that doesn't paint Bobby in the best of lights, and Hank understandably doesn't want to get rid of Ladybird, but he's just so distant to Bobby that it's insane. I don't know. Hank's choice isn't the Sophie's choice they wanted it to be, and just feels like an episode that had a good concept but failed in actualizing it. And the most tragic part is, this is the 100th episode of the show! Everybody get out your sparklers! Woo! 100th episode! It's the one where Bobby lives like a dog! You know, nothing but quality here, folks! Yeah, imagine your 100th episode is Hank's choice. Hank's choice is a hair-raising 5 out of 10. Boomhauer is polishing his car when Bobby comes up and informs him that his car is older than 1980 and is a major pollutant, and begins writing him up alongside anyone that's polluting the environment, and the more tickets he writes, the better he does in Mr. McKay's history class. Mr. McKay is played by the only man I'd let play me in a biopic, the brilliantly billion-talented actor, Paul Giamatti. They dig through Strickland's trash, and Hank even decides to go to environmental court, where he is railroaded as he tries to stand for having a dumpster. Arlen wants to put a new landfill in, and it'll destroy an algae habitat in the old quarry. But when Hank hears that they'll drain the quarry, he bolts to tell Bill and Dale that their greatest cover-up will finally be revealed. Boomhauer left his precious last car, Sally, on the side of the road, and Hank, Bill, and Dale decided to take his car as a prank for a joyride. They do donuts in the quarry, and then Dale can't work a stick and ends up driving her into the quarry as Live and Let Die fades away and their jackets are trapped in the car in its quarry-sized grave. Hank decides to help protest to save the itchy algae to keep the quarry maintained. They fail, and they try and strategize to save their collective asses. The worst part of the whole thing is that Boomhauer didn't give any of them a reason to do this. Sure, he didn't let them drive his car, but he was also just very protective of the car he took exponential care of. He's always been a friend to them, and they just blatantly betrayed his trust. Bobby overhears Hank admitting that he was pretending to care about the environment to hide what he did to Boomhauer, so he calls Boomhauer and tells him as Boomhauer speeds off. Hank comes clean, and Boomhauer walks off disappointed. Hank gets arrested, and Boomhauer takes Bobby to safety. However, when Bobby asks how long they're going to be mad at his dad, the saint of a man says like 2 or 3 weeks and to just let bygones be bygones. Like, Boomhauer is the moral core of the gang, and it's moments like this that make you see that. It's just tragic that it's when he suffers that we get these moments. Every time I revisit the episode, it's just wild that it ends with Hank getting arrested. That's it. What's the message? Hank comes clean to Boomhauer and shows remorse, and Boomhauer's big enough to help when he's needed, but man, that doesn't excuse anything Hank did, so it totally makes sense he'd be in cuffs. Which is like, this is a much stronger potential 100th episode. Just switch the two and you've got something a lot more substantial. It's Not Easy Being Green is an endangered but perfectly serviceable 8 out of 10. Nancy gets an early birthday wish for the big 4-0 on air, so everyone knows Nancy is getting up there. We also see that Luann is still doing the Major Baby shows. Dale even takes Nancy for a relaxing resort stay. However, while she's enjoying her birthday getaway, when the studio doesn't have anyone else, they throw Luann in a blue dress in front of the blue screen and she's a hit. The studio manager even replaces Nancy with her. Nancy wants a facelift and they can't afford it, and so Dale starts concocting a plan involving suing the cigarette company because it made her wrinkled. He thinks no one is gonna show, so he'll just get a default judgment, but sure enough, they show up and escalate it to federal court to countersue for $1.3 million. The CEO couldn't afford to hold back against their literally most loyal customer. This episode is amazing for a lot of reasons, mostly because it's a wild Dale story where they think he's public enemy number one and he's just being Dale, but also like the CEO, Reynolds Penland, is played by Robert Stack. You've got unsolved mysteries dropping some butter lines, just make the whole affair a golden brown delight. Also, while I have plenty of other series to talk about him in, David Herman knows how to bring it. He plays all kinds of characters and never lets his delivery waver, and it's kinda great. Dale gets a bugged Manitoba smoking singing fish, and all of this while Nancy is struggling with getting older and getting no support, while her husband argues she's so ugly to him and anyone she sees, she can't maintain a job. He even starts insulting her throughout the house to get picked up on the bug. He spikes her cream and causes an allergic reaction and gets her fired from the station. Like, Dale is going way, way too far and just rides the wave thinking he's right no matter what. Like, he is doing all this so she'll get what she wants. At his core, he just wants to help her, but he just doesn't know how to do it right. He even subpoenas her to court like a monster. Robert Penland even offers Dale $75,000 to just walk away, but he insists through it. Dale insists on representing himself and interrogating himself on the stand, showing that none of the hottest women in People's Magazine even hit his radar for true beauty compared to his incredible wife. He throws away his entire case just to reassure Nancy that she is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. He genuinely loves her more than anything, is just an idiot of the nth degree. He even manages to get Nancy her old job back and a filing cabinet. The Trouble with Gribbles, a play on The Trouble with Tribbles, is a second-hand 8 out of 10. Dale is entering into mower races and needs a pit crew. The gang decides to enter alongside him. Hank declares confidently that he is the man. However, as he's training, he starts to hurt and can't sit down, but refuses to go to the doctor. He still talks a tough game, but can't do anything to back it up. The poor man is in agony until he finally meets with Dr. Tate, played by Harry Groner, who tells him that his ass has disappeared. He gets a butt pad to help with the discomfort, and now he's got a dang problem on his hands. His saline slappers prove to be a nuisance, but he does find a support group, people that are going through the same butt-related affliction he is. Sure enough, Hank can practice on his mower again and starts strategizing his way of going for mower gold. Dale and the gang steal his pack of ass, and they even tell Cotton on him before getting them stuck on a power line, and Hank has to go knock him down with a stick. He's too embarrassed to even bother mowing again. Peggy drives him to a support group, forcing him to recognize that he does have a community. He gets inspired to keep trying, and it really feels uplifting in a way. He's willing to grow and adapt to his condition. Now, if the episode ended here, it would be a good episode, but we're only halfway through. Hank continues going to his meeting and wants his fellow ass plasters to join him in the lawnmower race, but they refuse, not wanting to out themselves. Hank is determined to spread the word about DGS, and we get to see Dale with his prime pit crew of Octavio. And so Hank shreds through the lawnmower races with CCR playing in the background, and then tragedy strikes. He blows his pivot cheek. It's not long before he's a one-cheek wonder, and then Dale pops his second cheek. The assless chap pulls off the track in agony until he sees his support group standing there ready to fling him new butt cheeks to mow his way to victory. However, Boomhauer naturally takes the trophy, and Hank takes a respectable 7th. But he takes it firmly seated in his mower like a man. He even finds someone by spreading the word about DGS before riding off to get new cheeks. It's a dumb episode, but it's dumb in the best way and fits King of the Hill so perfectly. Hank needs a fake ass so he can win a mower race. He blows his cheeks out in the race, and it's all your standard racing movie tropes, just with ass and mowers, and it's just good, dumb fun. I don't know. It was around this time my dad had a decal on a race car for a race for the cure, so this episode always kind of rang home a lot to me. Hank's backstory is a gat dang 10 out of 10. And here we are, the season finale. It's not a two-parter or a majorly star-studded country music celebration. No, it's a Bobby and Connie episode. Okay, that's not entirely fair. No doubt, including Gwen Stefani, do make a guest appearance voiced by themselves. That should at least be said. Bobby and Connie are planning for prom, and so Connie decides to ride through the high school parking lot alongside Bobby. He tries to save her from some high schoolers, and they chase him down in their car. Poor Bobby has just been brutalized this season. Dale decides to get a porta potty installed in the alley to make a fortune. Hank refuses to get Bobby's bike back for him, so he has to go with Joseph and Connie to get his bike back. However, the security guard grabs him and throws him into the school, thinking he's just a freshie. Bobby then realizes the food court is Liddy 5000 and shares his exploits with the gang before sneaking back over to the school as much as he can. He tries to squeal his way from being bullied by saying his kidneys cause him to not develop right, and he's in fact a senior, while the high school competes to get No Doubt to play at their prom, and his tiny figure comes in handy. They struggle to get through the dishwasher of doom until their hero, Bobby, takes the stage. Also, major shout out to Breckenmeyer, aka the Breckster, for bringing the high school kids to life perfectly. Man knows what's up. Bobby decides to stuff students in Dale's porta potty to make them stand out. Bobby even gets them to believe Connie is a hamster girl. No Doubt is in fact coming to the prom thanks to Bobby, and Hank has to use Dale's porta potty and gets pranked right as Bobby goes with the high schoolers to prank the middle school. However, as they're about to throw their water balloons, Bobby takes the shot for Connie and gets soaked. Connie uses Joseph to get back at Bobby, but he convinces the high school to let him and Connie go to the high school prom as they dance to a totally live and not pre-recorded performance by No Doubt. Talk about impressive, animating a song as fast as they're singing it. One of a kind from King of the Hill. Kidney Boy dies as Connie and Bobby dance the night away. And that's how the season ends. It started with nothing particularly gripping, and it ended just the same. But the adventure as a whole was genuinely fun. The writing was solid, topical for its time, and the performances and jokes were still top-notch. I mean, Dale does this whole porta potty experience literally just to prank Hank. That's great! Bobby cares about Connie and finds a way to survive his own way in high school. It doesn't have the flair of the last season's finale, but it's still an expertly written little adventure. Kidney Boy and Hamster Girl is No Doubt a 9 out of 10. And there we have it. That's season 5. Anything you think I was right on? Wrong on? What was your favorite episode? Least favorite? Honestly, season 5 I remembered being a pretty miserable affair, but looking back at it after the rewatch, it's probably where a lot of modern King of the Hill tropes actually started to take root. We got more B stories and more Hankless episodes like the Exterminator. Season 5 explored the different members of Rainy Street. It gave us some resolutions, but for the most part, it existed to just tell a good story. What if King of the Hill just gave you singleton episodes packed with quality? And Season 5 excellently delivered on that premise. What we got was great, and it's almost sad that we're reaching the halfway point so fast. But look at how far the show has come from its freshman outing. And next season gives us even more to love. We get a return of two-parters, some pretty great guest stars, and one of my favorite episodes of all time. So make sure to get your fix when we talk about Season 6. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stay strong and know that I believe in you. Always forward, never back. Keep going, and I'll see you next time.